Have you ever buried the love of your life, only to find out she left you $9 million and that very gift turned your own daughter against you? That's what happened to me. At 76, instead of comfort, I was met with betrayal. My daughter, her husband, even a lawyer, they sat in my living room and told me I was too old to manage my own life. They tried to strip me of dignity, of faith, of everything Margaret and I built. But what they didn't know was that I still had fight left in me, and the way I turned the tables left them speechless. This is not just money. This is blood, faith, and the kind of family drama story you'll never forget. My name is Nathaniel Carter, and I am 75 years old. I live alone now in a 2-story Victorian house on the quiet edge of Savannah, Georgia. The house has 5 rooms, and every one of them still whispers with the voice of my late wife, Margaret. She passed away 137 days ago. I know the number because each morning I tear off a page from the wall calendar in the kitchen. It was a habit from my days as an engineer, controlling time in small squares of paper, making the intangible tangible. Margaret used to laugh at me for clinging to that ritual, but her eyes always softened because she understood. The days are quiet now. Too quiet. My cane taps the parquet floor like a metronome. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, study. I move through the rooms like a shadow. Sometimes I set the radio on low or flip the television to the news just so the house doesn't sound like a mausoleum. Still, nothing can fill the hollow left when Margaret's laughter stopped echoing through these walls. Each morning after tearing the calendar page, I stand before the little wooden cross Margaret kept on the mantel. I whisper a prayer, nothing elaborate, just a plea. Lord, give me the strength to walk this day with dignity. I believe He listens even when I feel like a frail old man fighting to stay upright. My daughter Rebecca visits sometimes, though these visits feel more like obligations than reunions. She will sit on the sofa scrolling her phone while offering polite smiles. The girl who once sketched buildings late into the night dreaming of being an architect now looks like a guest in her own childhood home. Whenever she comes, her husband Damien isn't far behind. Tall, perfectly groomed, the kind of man who polishes his cufflinks more than his character. He carries ambition like a sword, cutting into every room with that air of calculation. The last time they visited, I poured my coffee into the old mug Rebecca gave me for my 50th birthday, "Best Dad" scrawled in fading letters. She hardly noticed. Damien glanced at the mug and smirked. "You still read the paper, Nathaniel. You can't even see half the words without those thick glasses. Why not just check the news on a tablet like everyone else?" "My eyes are fine," I replied, even though I was squinting at the fine print. "And besides, buying the paper keeps local folks in business." Damien chuckled in that condescending way of his, always justifying old habits with lofty reasons. "Just admit you can't change." Margaret would have never allowed him to speak to me that way. But Margaret is gone, and Rebecca only gave a nervous smile, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't argue. I just folded the paper and set it aside, but inside something twisted. You see, Rebecca didn't always look at me with that distance. I remember her at 15, hair flying in the Lake Michigan breeze, snuggled against my shoulder while Margaret snapped a photo. She trusted me with her whole heart then. Somewhere between that memory and now, the bond frayed. Was it Damien's influence? Was it her own choice? I can't say. But I know I lost more than a wife these past months. I lost the daughter I once knew. The Carter house has become a museum of memories. Lace curtains Margaret ordered from Europe. The silver-framed photograph of us smiling on vacation. even the faint scent of her favorite lavender perfume that still lingers in the bedroom. I sometimes sit in her armchair by the window, speaking into the quiet, as though she were still there. They're drifting further away, Margaret. What should I do? It might sound foolish, but I feel her answer in my heart. Hold steady. Don't let them turn you into something you're not. And so every day I wake, I pray, I tear off the calendar page, and I keep going. Because faith tells me the Lord still has plans for me, even if my own child seems to have none. Before we go on, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state down in the comments, because it always warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more family drama stories. Tales that remind us dignity and faith never fade, no matter the years. That morning, like so many others, I shuffled through the kitchen with my cane, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the head of a long oak table that could easily seat a dozen. Now it only held me a single plate and the silence of absence. I traced my finger across the polished surface, remembering Margaret bustling around with casseroles and pies, laughter spilling from every corner. It felt like yesterday, though the calendar on the wall insisted it had been months. Rebecca hadn't stayed for dinner in years. When she and Damien visit, it's always brief, an hour at most, and usually with some excuse about a corporate event or social gathering. Once she would have curled up at this very table, sketchbook open, telling me about her designs for historic buildings in downtown Savannah. Her eyes would light up, her hands flying across the paper as she explained her dream of restoring what others had forgotten. Now she just nods while Damien speaks. The last time we were all together was the week before Margaret passed. Even then, my wife held her dignity with iron strength, cooking Rebecca's favorite roast chicken despite her weakness. Damien arrived 40 minutes late, muttering about an urgent work meeting. He spent the meal glued to his phone. Margaret tried, bless her heart, to draw Rebecca out. "What about you, honey? Don't you deserve a vacation too?" Rebecca hesitated. Then Damien answered for her. "She's doing a fine job being a successful man's wife. That's a career of its own." I saw Margaret's lips tighten. She was a woman who once balanced a career and a family with grace, never letting one diminish the other. That night after Rebecca and Damien left, she whispered to me from her pillow, "He's changing her, Nathaniel." And not for the better. I knew she was right. But I swallowed my words the way I had too many times. I thought silence would keep the peace, that love meant enduring the disrespect. Looking back, I realized silence was a kind of surrender. Now the house feels too large. I sometimes wander into the study where Margaret's handwriting still labels the family photo albums. She was meticulous, every event dated and described. Turning those pages, I watch Rebecca grow up again, her first steps, her graduation, her first job at the architecture firm. I linger over the photo of her in her first office, surrounded by rolled-up blueprints. She looked alive, then proud. That spark is gone now, dimmed under Damien's shadow. I whisper another prayer in that quiet study, Lord, protect her heart. Remind her who she is. It's hard not to wonder if I failed her somehow. Did I push too much? Did I not push enough? Parenting doesn't end when your child grows up, but the role changes. You hope the values you planted take root. Sometimes, though, the soil shifts. As I sat with the photo album, the phone rang. Rebecca's name lit up the screen. For a moment, my heart leapt, hoping she was calling just to hear my voice. But her tone was businesslike. "Daddy, have you thought about selling the house? It's too much for you alone. The house. This house where she grew up, where her mother and I built every memory we had. I'm managing fine, I told her. I even hire someone to come by twice a week. It's just not sustainable. You'd be happier in a retirement community with medical staff people your age. Damien and I worry about you. I almost laughed, though it stung. Worry wasn't what I heard it was, calculation. The thought of them circling, already imagining what the sale of this place would bring. Thank you for your concern, Rebecca, I said evenly. But I'll stay in my home for as long as the Lord allows me to. There was silence on the line, followed by a sigh. Okay, Daddy. We'll talk more when we visit next week. When the call ended, I sat in the stillness, the photo album still open in front of me. I touched Margaret's handwriting and whispered, "They're circling, darling. Just like you warned me." And that night before sleep claimed me, I realized something sooner or later. This was going to come to a head. Faith would have to meet reality. The morning the letter arrived, I woke with a strange heaviness in my chest. Not the kind of heaviness my doctor warns me about, the dangerous kind, but the weight of something looming. My calendar told me it had been 141 days since Margaret's funeral. I tore off the square of paper, whispered my usual prayer at the little wooden cross, and dressed in the tweed jacket she gave me for my 70th birthday. By mid-morning, I was pushing open the glass doors of Grant & Associates, the law firm that had served Margaret's family for generations. The receptionist, a young woman with polite eyes, smiled at me the way people often do at men my age, gentle, careful, as though I might crumble if handled too roughly. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Grant is expecting you. Conference room 2. Inside, Edward Grant, a man with silver hair, sharp spectacles, and the kind of posture that seemed carved from oak, stood to greet me. "Nathaniel," he said warmly, clasping my hand. "I wish it were under better circumstances, but it's good to see you." He guided me to the chair across from him. Papers were stacked neatly on the polished oak table, a fountain pen resting atop them like a judge's gavel. He spoke gently, but every word felt like it carried the weight of history. "As you know, your late wife Margaret was a significant shareholder in Greenchem Industries, the company founded by her father back in 1961. She held 40% of the company at the time of her passing." I nodded. I had known she was influential in the company, but she rarely spoke of figures. She always said the company was less about wealth and more about responsibility. Her father had built it with the belief that profit meant nothing if it came at the expense of community or creation. Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses. Per her will, Margaret bequeathed her entire 40% share directly to you, Nathaniel. Based on the most recent valuation, those shares are worth approximately $12 million. The number struck me like a hammer. 12 million. I gripped the armrest of the chair until my knuckles turned white. For a long moment I couldn't speak. She left nothing to Rebecca. My voice was low, uncertain. "That's correct," Edward said carefully. Then he slid a sealed envelope across the table. "But Margaret anticipated your question. She wrote you this letter to be delivered alongside the legal documents." My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Margaret's handwriting, graceful and steady, filled the paper. I began to read. "My dearest Nathaniel, if you are reading this, I have gone home to the Lord. Please don't let grief consume you. I want you to live. I know you may think it cruel that I left our shares in Greenchem to you instead of Rebecca. But hear my heart, this is not about denying our daughter. It is about protecting her from Damien, from ambition, and from a path that would destroy what my father built. I have watched Rebecca change. She once dreamed of restoring old buildings, of preserving beauty. Now she nods silently, while Damien speaks of profit margins. If I left these shares to her, they would fall under his control, and he would strip Greenchem of its soul, turning it into just another trophy for his career. You, Nathaniel, though not a Preston by blood, have always understood. You respect people more than profit, tradition more than status. That is why I trust you to carry this burden. Use it not to buy affection, but to live faithfully, to protect our legacy, and to guide the younger generation. If Rebecca's heart softens, if she remembers her true self, then you may choose to let her in. But until then, guard this inheritance with strength. You are stronger than you believe, my love. Behind your gentleness is the steel I always adored. Do not let anyone tell you that age has made you weak. Remember, dignity is God's gift, and you must defend it. By the time I reached the last line, always yours, Margaret, my vision blurred. Tears splashed onto the page, smearing the ink. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, pressing it to my chest. Even from the grave, Margaret was guiding me, strengthening me, reminding me that my worth did not fade with years or wrinkles. Edward cleared his throat softly. We'll need to arrange the formal transfer of shares and notify the board. There will be taxes to handle and your signature on these forms. I nodded numbly, signing where he indicated, though my mind was still wrapped in Margaret's words. When I left the building, Savannah's streets looked different, brighter somehow. I felt like a man who had been entrusted with a sacred duty. $12 million, it wasn't just money. It was Margaret's trust, her faith in me, and her shield against those who would exploit her daughter. As I lowered myself into the driver's seat of my old Buick, I whispered a prayer into the stillness. Lord, give me wisdom. Don't let me stumble. Help me honor her and help me guard this gift you've placed in my hands. I knew then that my days of drifting like a shadow through empty rooms were over. A storm was coming. Damien would never sit quietly once he learned of this inheritance. But with Margaret's letter pressed against my heart and God's strength beneath my feet, I was ready to face it. The first crack came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of morning when Savannah's air hangs heavy with magnolia and river mist. I was in the garden pruning Margaret's roses when the sound of tires crunching on gravel made me look up. A sleek black Mercedes pulled into the drive. Damien stepped out first, immaculate in a navy suit, though it was barely 9 a.m. Rebecca followed, her hair pulled back too tight, her smile brittle. They hadn't called ahead. That alone told me this wasn't a visit of affection. Daddy, Rebecca said, walking toward me. We need to talk. I dusted soil off my gloves and leaned a little heavier on my cane. Of course, dear. Come inside. I'll put on some coffee. Inside, they settled on the sofa. Damien crossed his legs, the picture of controlled authority. Rebecca sat close but slightly behind him, like a supporting character in someone else's play. I took my armchair, the one Margaret always teased me for calling my captain's seat. Straight to the point, Damien began, his tone too smooth. Word travels fast in this city. We've heard about the recent transfer of shares. My chest tightened. So soon I had hoped for more time before this storm broke. And what exactly have you heard? That Margaret left her 40% of Greenchem to you, Damien said, smiling without warmth. That makes you a very wealthy man, Nathaniel. Rebecca's eyes darted to mine, searching, pleading. Daddy! Is it true? I held her gaze. Yes, Rebecca. Your mother left her shares to me. That was her decision. Her face fell, but why she always said Green Chem was family legacy. I'm her daughter. My heart ached hearing the tremor in her voice. I saw the girl who once ran barefoot through these halls, clutching her sketchbook, telling me she would rebuild Savannah one building at a time. But then I saw Damien's hand slide over hers, possessive, anchoring her. Exactly, Damien said. She's your daughter. It stands to reason she should inherit. Forgive me, Nathaniel, but Margaret must have been under strain. Treatments, medications, such things can cloud judgment. The words chilled me. I remembered Margaret's clarity, the way she whispered prayers with me even in her final week. Her mind had been sharp, her faith sharper. You dare suggest she wasn't of sound mind? My voice was steady but low. Damien leaned back unbothered. I'm suggesting the courts might see it that way. We've consulted with advisors. There are precedents for challenging wills under these conditions. Rebecca winced. Damien, she whispered, but he pressed on. I turned to my daughter. Rebecca, do you truly believe your mother didn't know what she was doing? Her eyes brimmed. I don't know what to believe, Daddy. I can't understand why she'd leave me out completely. Didn't she love me? The question stabbed deeper than any accusation. I longed to cross the room, to take her hands, to tell her Margaret loved her beyond measure. But Damien's presence poisoned the air. Your mother loved you, I said softly. But she also saw how much you've changed. She feared what would happen if those shares fell into the wrong hands. Damien's eyes narrowed. Wrong hands meaning mine. If the shoe fits, I replied quietly. For a moment, silence reigned. The ticking clock on the mantel sounded like a hammer. Then Damien's smile returned sharp as glass. We don't want a battle, Nathaniel. Litigation would be unpleasant for everyone. But if you were to transfer the shares now as an act of goodwill, it would settle matters cleanly. Rebecca's lip quivered. Daddy, maybe it's for the best. You don't need the stress, not at your age, at my age. The phrase burned. I thought of Margaret's letter, her reminder that behind my gentleness was steel. I thought of the prayer I had whispered that very morning. I appreciate your concern, I said, my voice firm, but I will not undo your mother's wishes, not for convenience, not for threats, and certainly not for greed. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Damien's jaw tightened. This isn't over, he said, rising. You'll hear from our lawyer. Rebecca lingered a moment, torn, her face pale with conflict. Then she followed her husband out the door. The slam of the car door echoed through the house like a verdict. I sat alone in the silence, Margaret's letter heavy in my pocket. I felt sorrow for my daughter, sorrow for the distance between us. But above it all, I felt a calm resolve settle in. And for the first time in months, my heart didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a shield. The knock on my door came like a thunderclap on a clear day. I had just settled into Margaret's old chair in the study, a cup of coffee in hand, her letter resting on the desk beside me. The roses outside swayed gently in the Savannah breeze. For a fleeting moment, life felt almost normal. Then came the knock, hard, deliberate, demanding. When I opened the door, there stood Rebecca, pale and trembling, with Damien beside her, as sharp and smug as ever. and trailing them was a stranger, a man in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His handshake was firm but cold. "Mr. Carter," he said, "Andrew Wallace, attorney at law. I represent your daughter and son-in-law." I stepped aside. "Come in. Let's hear what you've come to say." We gathered in the living room. I sat in my old armchair, Margaret's portrait watching from the mantel. Rebecca and Damien perched on the sofa, the lawyer between them like a shield. My cane rested across my knees, but inside I prayed silently, "Lord, help me keep steady. Help me speak with your strength." Wallace cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, it has come to my client's attention that your late wife's shares in Greenchem Industries were transferred solely to you, excluding your daughter. We believe this outcome does not reflect Mrs. Carter's true intent." Rebecca's voice broke and thin and shaky. "Daddy, why would Mom leave me nothing? Am I not her child?" My chest tightened. "Rebecca, your mother loved you more than anything, but she feared what might happen if Damien controlled the company. This was her decision, not mine." Damien's lips curled. "Her decision under the influence of cancer treatments and pain medication. Hardly reliable judgment, wouldn't you say?" My blood boiled, but I kept my tone even. Margaret's mind was clear until her final breath. She knew exactly what she was doing. Wallace opened his briefcase, sliding a stack of papers across the coffee table. "Nonetheless, we are prepared to challenge the will in probate court on the grounds of diminished capacity. Furthermore, we may raise concerns about your own ability to manage assets of this magnitude given your advanced age." The words hung heavy. Age. Incompetence. It was everything Margaret had warned me about. I tightened my grip on the cane, feeling the steel she always said lay beneath my gentleness. "Are you suggesting," I said slowly, "that I am unfit to manage my own affairs?" Damien leaned forward, smirking. "Come now, Nathaniel. 75 isn't young. Why drag this out? Think of your stress, your health. Just transfer the shares to Rebecca now, and we can all avoid a nasty, very public battle." Rebecca's eyes shone with tears. "Daddy, please. It's too much responsibility for you." I looked at her, my heart aching. Then I shifted my gaze to Damien. His hand rested over hers, possessive, controlling the same way I had seen too many times before. I remembered Margaret's words, "Don't let them make you doubt yourself." "You're right about one thing," I said at last. "I don't intend to drag this out. That's why I've already acted." Confusion flickered across their faces. I rose slowly, cane tapping against the floor, and walked to the secretary desk in the corner. From the drawer, I pulled out a thick folder. Setting it down on the table, I opened it with deliberate calm. "These are the documents transferring my 40% of Greenchem into a management trust. I retain lifetime income, but operational control lies with the board. Upon my death, the shares will return to the company for reinvestment in its environmental projects." This was signed 3 days ago in the presence of 2 independent physicians who certified my full mental capacity. The lawyer's face drained of color as he scanned the papers. Damien stiffened. Rebecca gasped. "You can't do this!" Damien barked. "I already did," I said, "and it's legally ironclad. Your mother's legacy will not be a pawn in anyone's game. Not while I breathe." Rebecca's tears spilled over. "Daddy, why would you lock me out? Why wouldn't you trust me?" My voice softened. "It's not about locking you out, Rebecca. It's about honoring your mother's faith. When your heart is ready, when you can remember who you are apart from Damien's shadow, the door will still be open. Until then, this trust will protect what Margaret cherished. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock. Finally, Wallace closed the folder, his expression grim. Under these circumstances, a legal challenge would be difficult to pursue. Damien shot him a furious glare, then turned back to me. "You've made a grave mistake, old man." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes squarely. The only mistake would have been surrendering my dignity, my wife's legacy, and my God-given responsibility. And that, Damien, I will never do. He paled, jaw tight, then rose, dragging Rebecca with him. She looked back, once eyes clouded with sorrow and confusion, before the door shut hard behind them. For the first time in years, I felt not like a burden, not like an old man waiting to fade, but like a man standing firm in the light of truth. When the sound of their car finally faded down the gravel drive, the house fell into the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I stayed seated in my armchair, Margaret's portrait, watching me from the mantel, her letter heavy in my pocket. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the release of holding myself so steady in front of them. I bowed my head and prayed aloud, voice breaking the silence, "Lord, thank you. Thank you for giving me courage today. When my strength falters, remind me that yours never does." For a long while, I just sat there breathing, listening to the tick of the old clock. It wasn't victory I felt, not triumph, not satisfaction. It was something quieter, steadier. Relief, perhaps, and a strange peace that I had stood where I needed to stand. Still behind the peace lurked sorrow. Rebecca's tearful eyes haunted me. My daughter, my flesh and blood. She truly believed I was cutting her out, punishing her, shutting her away. That was the knife twist Damien knew how to use. I wanted to chase after her, to explain, to beg her to see her mother's heart behind my actions. But I stayed in my chair because chasing would only make her retreat further under Damien's shadow. That evening I set the trust documents back into the desk drawer, locking them away. Then I pulled out Margaret's letter again. I read the last lines slowly. "Use it to live a decent life, to uphold the values we believe in. Don't let grief cloud your remaining years. Live fully. Live fully." The words echoed through me like a command. For months, I had been existing like a ghost in these rooms, moving through routines, waiting for something, maybe waiting to die. But now Margaret was asking more of me. God was asking more of me. The very next week, I drove into Savannah for a scheduled board meeting at Green Chem Industries. My brother-in-law, Richard Preston, greeted me with a handshake that carried both warmth and weight. "Margaret was right," he said. "You belong here. We need your voice." I sat at the long conference table, surrounded by executives decades younger than me. For the first few minutes, I felt every one of my 75 years. Then the discussion turned to a new plant design. The young architect presenting it spoke confidently, but I noticed inefficiencies immediately: wasted space, energy drain, logistical flaws. My old instincts stirred. "Excuse me," I said, clearing my throat. "If you shift the packaging line closer to storage, you can cut transport time by 15%. Reorganize the material flow, and you'll reduce costs significantly." The room fell silent. The young man blinked, then scribbled notes. Richard leaned back, smiling. "See, this is why we needed you here." For the first time in years, I felt alive in a room, not as a relic, not as a burden, but as a man with something to offer. Margaret's legacy wasn't just a number on paper. It was a living, breathing responsibility. And God had given me more years so I could carry it. That night, I didn't return to an empty house. Diane, Margaret's sister, stopped by with her son Ethan, a bright-eyed researcher in environmental science. They brought a casserole and laughter filling the dining room that had been silent for so long. Ethan asked me about my old projects, eager to learn from my experience. He reminded me of Rebecca before Damien dulled her spark. We sat late into the evening, talking about faith, about family, about the future of Green Chem's Green Solvents project. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes glowing with conviction. Uncle Nathaniel, this company can lead the industry into a cleaner era. Grandma Preston dreamed it, Aunt Margaret pushed for it. And now you can anchor it. I swallowed hard, hearing Margaret's voice in his enthusiasm. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope instead of grief, when the house grew quiet again after they left. Rebecca was still absent. The pain of her absence still gnawed. But I understood now I could not stop living while I waited for her return. I would keep the door open. But in the meantime, I would live fully as Margaret asked, as God required. And for the first time since Margaret's funeral, I didn't feel like a shadow wandering an empty house. I felt like a man stepping into the light of a new chapter. The weeks after that confrontation unfolded differently than I expected. I had braced myself for court papers, endless phone calls from lawyers, and sleepless nights spent replaying Rebecca's tears in my mind. But instead, something else happened. Life began to move forward. At Green Chem, I found myself needed. The first meeting had been intimidating, but soon the younger engineers were stopping by my office with blueprints and questions. I hadn't sat at a drafting table in years, but my mind still remembered the math. The logic, the shortcuts learned from decades of building. When I sketched out an alternative design for a waste management system, the team looked at me with a kind of respect I hadn't felt in a long time. "You've still got it, Mr. Carter," one of them said. I chuckled. "Engineering doesn't rust. You just oil the joints once in a while." It felt good. More than good, it felt like purpose. For so long, I had been drifting in Margaret's absence, moving through days as if waiting to disappear. Now, with her shares binding me to the company, I was no longer invisible. I was contributing, guiding, shaping something larger than myself. At home, the air felt less oppressive too. Diane began dropping by more often, sometimes with Ethan, sometimes with a pot of soup or a pie. They didn't tiptoe around me or speak in hushed voices like people do when they're afraid you might break. They treated me like family, ordinary, flawed, still valuable. One evening, Ethan brought a group of graduate students to the house. They crowded around the dining room table with laptops and coffee cups, discussing renewable chemical processes with a kind of energy that reminded me of Margaret's younger days. I sat at the head of the table, listening, chiming in when I had something to offer. And for the first time since her funeral, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive again. Of course, Rebecca's absence lingered like a bruise. Sometimes I would hear a car outside, and for a heartbeat think it was her only to be disappointed. I couldn't stop being her father. I couldn't stop hoping she would one day walk through the door without Damien by her side. But I also realized something important. I could not anchor my life to her choices. One afternoon, I returned from the company to find a letter slipped under my door. It was from Rebecca. The handwriting was familiar yet shaky, as though she had written in haste. "Daddy, I don't understand you anymore. It feels like you've chosen a legacy over your own daughter. I can't forgive you right now. Maybe one day. Rebecca. I read it 3 times. My heart twisted, but I folded the paper carefully and placed it beside Margaret's letter in the desk drawer. 2 voices, one urging me to guard, one accusing me of betrayal. I decided then that I would carry both. One reminded me of duty, the other of the cost of that duty. Still, life went on. My mornings were no longer only about tearing off a calendar page or staring into silence. They became about phone calls, meetings, problem-solving sessions. I even started walking more cane, tapping the sidewalks of Savannah as I strolled along the riverfront after long days at the office. People nodded to me, recognizing me not as a lonely widower, but as a man still active, still present. In the evenings, when the house settled into quiet again, I would sit in Margaret's armchair. I didn't speak into the silence anymore. Instead, I thought about what tomorrow might bring. Plans, projects, possibilities. Losing her had nearly hollowed me out. But holding firm against Damien, refusing to bend, had lit something inside me. It wasn't pride exactly. It was the knowledge that I was still capable of protecting what mattered, of contributing, of living. The silence no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like space waiting to be filled. The shift was subtle at first, like sunlight slowly creeping across a floor in the late afternoon. I noticed it most on the weekends. My house, once suffocatingly quiet, began to buzz with voices again. Not the voices I once longed for: Rebecca's laughter, Margaret humming in the kitchen, but new voices, unexpected ones. Diane made it a habit to stop by every Saturday. She'd sweep into the kitchen with grocery bags, insisting I shouldn't live on coffee and toast alone. We'd cook together, her giving orders, me pretending to follow them, and somehow dinner always turned out better than when I cooked alone. She had Margaret's way of making a house feel less like a building and more like a hearth. Then there was Ethan. He was at Green Chem most days, but sometimes he dropped by in the evenings with his research team. They turned my dining room into a brainstorming hub, spreading out sketches, graphs, and laptops. I'd watch them argue passionately about emissions and sustainable solvents, their youthful energy filling the house like oxygen. When they asked for my input, I couldn't help myself. I'd pull a notepad closer, sketching out layouts pointing to potential flaws, suggesting improvements. They listened, really listened. And when they nodded in agreement, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relevance. One evening stands out. The group had just left, and Ethan lingered by the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder. "You know, Uncle Nathaniel," he said, "you've got more patience than half my professors. You explain things without making us feel small. That's rare." I shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "I just share what I know." "That's the point," he grinned. "You share. Most people hoard knowledge. You give it away." When the door shut behind him, I sat back in my chair and realized my heart wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Community began to grow around me in unexpected ways. The neighbors who once waved politely and kept walking started stopping by when they saw my driveway full of cars. A retired teacher named Mrs. Callahan brought over peach cobbler to feed those young scientists of yours. The pastor from down the street invited me to speak at a community luncheon about my career in engineering. Even the grocer began asking me about Green Chem's projects, as if I had become the bridge between the company and the town. The emptiness that had defined my days after Margaret's passing no longer had the same grip. My house, with its high ceilings and lingering echoes, was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It had become a meeting place, a kind of second home for people chasing ideas bigger than themselves. Of course, Rebecca's absence remained a wound. I'd glance at the empty chair across from me and feel the sting. But I also realized something important. While I couldn't fill that space with her, I could still fill the room with life. And in doing so, I was no longer sitting in grief's shadow. Late one evening, after the house emptied out again, I found myself standing at the window. The garden lights illuminated Margaret's roses blooming bright against the dark. For the first time since her death, I smiled without forcing it. Margaret had asked me in her letter to live fully. At first I thought she meant guarding her shares, fighting off Damien, proving my competence. But now I understood living fully meant letting the house breathe again, letting people in, allowing myself to be more than a grieving widower. I turned from the window cane, tapping softly on the floor, and walked through the rooms. No longer empty halls echoing with loss, but spaces alive with new energy, new laughter, new hope. It wasn't the life I expected. It wasn't the family table I once knew. But it was life, and it was mine to claim. The morning of the ceremony, I woke earlier than usual. Dawn filtered through the lace curtains Margaret had chosen decades ago, turning the room pale gold. I lay still for a while, listening to the quiet, the tick of the mantel clock downstairs, the faint hum of the refrigerator. In those first moments, I thought of Margaret. I pictured her sitting up beside me, brushing her hair back, saying, "Nathaniel, don't forget your speech notes." She would have teased me about my nerves, smoothed my tie, and given me that steady look that always said, "You're more capable than you think." But today, I would walk into that hall alone, or at least that's how it seemed at first. By mid-morning, Diane arrived, sweeping into the house like she had every Saturday these past months. "You're not leaving without breakfast," she insisted, bustling about the kitchen. She made scrambled eggs while I rehearsed my lines one last time. Ethan showed up not long after, a bundle of energy with his laptop under his arm. "Slides are ready, Uncle Nathaniel," he said, giving me a thumbs up. And suddenly I realized I wasn't going alone. When we reached the Green Chem auditorium, the place was buzzing. Rows of chairs filled with employees, board members, local press, and even a few government officials. The banners read, "Celebrating Innovation, Honoring Legacy." My chest tightened at those words. Legacy, Margaret's word. Richard Preston greeted me at the door, firm handshake and warm smile. "Nathaniel, we couldn't have done this without you. Today we celebrate more than a project, we celebrate the values you and Margaret carried all your lives." Those words steadied me more than he knew. When my name was announced, applause filled the room. I rose slowly, cane in hand, and walked to the podium. My palms sweated despite the cool air. For a moment the lights blinded me and my heart pounded like a drum. Then I spotted Ethan sitting in the front row, giving me a nod. Diane's encouraging smile. And in that instant, I felt Margaret's presence, too quiet, steady, guiding. I began to speak. At 76, some people expect you to slow down, to fade quietly into the background. But I stand here today to tell you that wisdom and faith don't fade with age, they deepen. When my wife Margaret started this project, she believed it wasn't just about chemicals or profits. It was about responsibility to people, to creation, to the generations yet to come. I only tried to honor her vision. I walked them through the improvements we had made, the redesign of the production line, the cost savings, the environmental impact. But more than numbers, I talked about values, about how integrity can't be measured in quarterly earnings, about how success isn't just climbing higher, but holding firm to the principles that ground us. The hall was silent. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence of listening. When I finished, there was a pause, then a swell of applause that shook the room. People stood. Not for me, I thought, but for Margaret, for the vision she had planted, and that we had carried forward together. Afterward, as we mingled at the reception, young engineers approached me with questions. One of them, a bright-eyed woman named Clara, said, "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be the kind of professional who balances success with conscience. Thank you for showing us it's possible." I shook her hand, feeling my throat tighten. This is what Margaret wanted, I thought. Not glory, but a seed planted in others. Ethan clapped me on the back. "Told you they'd love you." "Not me," I replied, smiling. "The work, the values." Same thing he said with a grin. On the drive home, I looked out the window at the town, the familiar streets, the orchards glowing in late afternoon light. My house would still be quiet tonight, but it no longer felt empty. It had become part of something larger, a place where memory met legacy, where sorrow gave way to new purpose. When we pulled into the driveway, I paused before getting out. I lifted my eyes to the evening sky and whispered, "We did it, Margaret. Your vision lives on. And I'll keep living too, just like you asked me to." And for the first time in years, I felt not like a man nearing the end, but a man at the start of something new. When I sit alone in the quiet of my study these days, Kane resting by my chair and Margaret's photo smiling at me from the mantel, I often think about the winding road that brought me here. It wasn't a straight path. It was littered with betrayals, with disappointment, with nights when I stared at the ceiling and wondered if my own daughter still saw me as her father, or only as an obstacle between her husband and $9 million. I can still hear Keith's voice, calm and smug, telling me it would be better for everyone if I simply transferred the shares to Rebecca. I can still feel the sting of my daughter's words, calling me selfish, cruel, an old man too stubborn to accept the future. Those wounds don't vanish overnight. They don't disappear simply because the board of Green Chem welcomed me, or because Diane and Ethan filled my home with new life. They remain like scars after a surgery, reminders of the pain endured and the healing that followed. But here's what I've learned. Scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof of survival. And every scar tells a story, stories not just of brokenness, but of restoration. That perhaps is the greatest lesson of these past months. Faith carried me through. Faith in God, who whispered to my heart when the voices around me tried to drown me out. Faith in Margaret's letter, her last gift, urging me to live, to guard the legacy entrusted to us. And faith in myself that at 76 I was not useless, not finished, not a relic to be tucked away in silence. I was still a man of worth, capable of standing firm and saying no. This far and no further. When I joined the board of Green Chem, I thought I was merely honoring Margaret's wish. But in truth, it became something more. It became my new beginning. I watched young engineers like Jason light up when they understood a concept I explained. I saw Ethan grow confident in his vision for sustainability, knowing his uncle believed in him. I witnessed a company honor not just profit margins, but responsibility, a value born from Margaret's heart. And I realized my own life wasn't over. It was entering a new season. Rebecca still hasn't called, The silence between us is a heavy thing. Some nights I wonder if I'll ever hear her laughter in this house again. But I've made peace with the uncertainty, because love, true love, doesn't vanish with conflict. My door will always remain open for her. Should she ever see Keith for who he truly is, should she ever remember the girl who once sat on my shoulders at Lake Michigan, I will be here. Not with judgment, but with arms open wide. Until then, I will not waste what time I have left waiting in vain. Instead, I will live. I will tend Margaret's roses, host Ethan and his friends guide the next generation at Greenchem, and let my days be filled with more than silence. I will honor the woman who believed in me until her last breath, and I will keep faith with the God who gave me strength when I thought I had none left. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: betrayal may shake you, but it does not define you. Age may slow your steps, but it cannot erase your dignity. And even when family drama stories cut deepest, when the people you love the most wound you in ways strangers never could, you still have the power to choose. To choose truth over lies, principle over manipulation, faith over despair. That choice is mine, and it's yours too. So tonight, as I sit in the quiet once more, I whisper a prayer of gratitude for Margaret, for the new life blooming around me, and even for the trials that forced me to find my strength. My story isn't finished. Neither is yours. Because dignity once reclaimed is something no one can take from us again.